A giant German Shepherd refuses to let a baby crawl alone, and when the mom sees why, she freezes. At first, she thinks her loyal dog is acting strange, almost aggressive. He blocks the baby's path, growls at empty corners, and refuses to leave the kitchen doorway. But then one afternoon, he suddenly throws himself over the baby, shaking, staring at something the mom can't see. And that's when everything changes. Because the danger he's sensing, it isn't coming from outside the house, it's coming from inside it, something hidden, something no one would ever suspect. And as the truth begins to surface, this mother realizes her dog hasn't been misbehaving. He's been fighting a threat she never imagined. But what happens when the thing he's been protecting them from finally breaks loose? And what will this mom discover when she uncovers the real reason her dog refused to let her baby crawl alone? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Leona Kessler stretched her tired arms as she folded another tiny t-shirt, adding it to the growing stack of laundry on her worn couch. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of her small duplex, casting shadows across the cramped living room where toys were scattered like colorful islands on a beige carpet sea. Harbor, her faithful German Shepherd, lay at her feet, his graying muzzle resting on his massive paws as he kept his usual watchful eye on baby Junie. The sound of coins clinked in her pocket, lunch money carefully counted out for the week ahead. Every penny mattered these days. Leona glanced at her monthly budget notebook on the coffee table, its pages filled with careful calculations and hopeful planning. The rent took most of her paycheck, leaving little wiggle room for extras or emergencies. "At least we have each other, right, Harbor?" she said softly. The big dog's tail thumped against the floor in response, his cloudy eyes fixed on her with unwavering devotion. Harbor had been her rock since she'd left Mark 2 years ago, just before Junie was born. The retired search and rescue dog might be losing his hearing, but his protective instincts were as sharp as ever. Junie's gleeful babble drew Leona's attention to where her 1-year-old daughter sat playing with plastic blocks. Her fair hair caught the sunlight, creating a halo effect that made Leona's heart squeeze with love and determination. This was why she worked such long shifts at the diner, to give her baby girl a chance at a better life. A loud knock at the door made Harbor's ears prick up. Leona's shoulders tensed as she recognized the sharp, impatient pattern. Bryce Hallowell didn't wait for her to answer before using his key to unlock the door. "Ms. Kessler," the landlord said, stepping inside without invitation. His expensive suit looked out of place in her modest living room. "I trust you. Have this month's rent ready?" Harbor moved to stand between Hallowell and Junie, his posture alert but controlled. Leona appreciated the dog's protective nature, especially around their landlord, whose smile never quite reached his eyes. "It's not due until the 5th, Mr. Hallowell," Leona replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "As always, you'll have it then." Hallowell's thin lips pressed together as he glanced around the room with barely concealed disdain. "See that you do, and please remember that your lease specifically states no large dogs." "Harbor is registered as my support animal," Leona countered, the words practiced and firm. "I have all the documentation, as I've shown you before." "Yes, well," Hallowell straightened his tie. "Just keep that beast under control. I've had complaints about barking." Leona bit back a retort. Harbor rarely barked these days, and when he did, it was always for good reason. But she couldn't afford to antagonize Hallowell. Finding another apartment within her budget would be nearly impossible in this market. After Hallowell left, Leona sank onto the couch, her hands slightly shaking. Harbor padded over and rested his head on her knee, offering silent comfort. She ran her fingers through his thick black and tan fur, drawing strength from his steady presence. "What would we do without you, boy?" she whispered. The rest of the morning fell into their usual routine. Leona prepared Junie's lunch while Harbor maintained his vigilant watch. The kitchen was tiny, barely big enough for a small table and 2 chairs, but Leona had made it homey with cheerful curtains and Junie's artwork taped to the refrigerator. As she chopped carrots for Junie's lunch, Leona mentally calculated the hours she'd need to pick up at the diner to cover next month's expenses. The constant juggling act of bills, childcare, and work hours was exhausting, but she'd learned to take it one day at a time. Junie's delighted squeal brought Leona's attention back to the present. Her daughter had mastered crawling with impressive speed and was now making her way toward the kitchen, probably drawn by the sounds of food preparation. But before she could cross the threshold, Harbor moved with surprising quickness for his age. The big dog positioned himself firmly in Junie's path, blocking her progress. His posture was rigid, ears forward, and his eyes fixed intently on something Leona couldn't see. Junie tried to maneuver around him, but Harbor shifted, keeping himself between the baby and the kitchen. "Harbor?" Leona called, puzzled by his unusual behavior. "It's okay, boy. Let her come in." But Harbor wouldn't budge. A low rumble, not quite a growl, vibrated in his chest. Junie, used to treating the massive dog like a climbing frame, grabbed his fur to pull herself up to standing. Usually Harbor would tolerate this with patient dignity, but this time he gently backed up, forcing Junie to sit back down on her bottom. "What's gotten into you?" Leona moved closer, scanning the kitchen for anything that might have triggered Harbor's protective response. Everything looked normal. The same worn linoleum, the familiar hum of the old refrigerator, the slight draft from the window that never quite sealed properly. Harbor's intensity didn't waver. His behavior reminded Leona of stories she'd heard about his search and rescue days, when he would lock onto the scent of danger or a person in distress. But surely there was nothing like that here, in their own kitchen. Junie, frustrated at being blocked from her goal, began to fuss. Leona scooped her up, still watching Harbor with concern. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the kitchen, his body tense and alert. "You're being silly," Leona told him, though something about his certainty made her uneasy. "There's nothing there, Harbor. You're just being overprotective." But even as she said the words, a small doubt crept in. In the 2 years since Harbor had come into her life, she'd learned to trust his instincts. He'd never steered her wrong, from warning her about loose stairs to alerting her to Junie's fever before other symptoms appeared. Still, this was their kitchen. The same space where they'd eaten breakfast just hours ago. Leona bounced Junie on her hip, trying to shake off her growing unease. "Come on, boy. Let's have lunch in the living room today." Harbor followed them out, but his attention remained fixed on the kitchen doorway. As Leona settled Junie into her high chair, she couldn't help glancing back at the kitchen herself. Everything looked perfectly normal, but Harbor's behavior had planted a seed of worry in her mind. "It's nothing," she told herself firmly, focusing on feeding Junie her lunch. "He's just having an off day." But even as she tried to convince herself, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that Harbor knew something she didn't. The big dog finally lay down near Junie's high chair, but he positioned himself so he could keep watching the kitchen, his vigilance unwavering. Leona worked to maintain her routine, pushing aside her concerns. She had enough real worries without inventing new ones. Yet, as she watched Harbor's continued alertness, she couldn't help but wonder if this strange moment was trying to tell her something she wasn't yet ready to see. The next few days brought more of Harbor's peculiar behavior, each incident making Leona increasingly uneasy. What had started as a single strange moment evolved into a pattern she couldn't ignore. On Tuesday morning, while Leona folded laundry in the living room, Junie started her determined crawl towards the kitchen. Before she'd made it halfway there, Harbor's massive form appeared, positioning himself like a furry wall between the baby and her destination. His ears were alert, his posture rigid with concern. "Harbor, enough," Leona said firmly, watching Junie's face scrunch up in frustration. "She's just going to get her sippy." "Cup." But Harbor wouldn't budge. Instead, he used his broad head to gently nudge Junie in the opposite direction, steering her back toward her toy corner. When Junie protested with a whimper, Harbor let out a soft, rumbling growl, not threatening, but clearly communicating his determination. That afternoon, when Sarah from next door came over for coffee, Harbor's behavior became even more embarrassing. Sarah watched wide-eyed as the huge German Shepherd practically herded Junie away from the kitchen doorway for the third time in 20 minutes. "I've never seen him act like this," Leona explained, feeling her cheeks flush. "He's always been protective, but this is different." Sarah set down her coffee cup, concern evident in her expression. "Maybe you should have someone check him out. That doesn't seem normal, even for Harbor." "He's fine physically," Leona insisted, though doubt gnawed at her. "The vet just gave him a clean bill of health last month, except for his hearing loss." Later that week, when her mother visited with some hand-me-down clothes for Junie, Harbor's actions grew even more intense. As soon as Junie made her usual crawl toward the kitchen, Harbor not only blocked her path, but laid down completely across the doorway, creating an impossible barrier for the baby to cross. "Leona, honey," her mother said, watching the scene unfold, "I know you trust that dog, but this is getting out of hand. What if he accidentally hurts her?" "Mom, Harbor would never hurt Junie," Leona replied defensively, though her mother's words echoed her own hidden fears. "He's just being extra careful lately." But even as she defended him, Leona couldn't shake the growing sense that something was wrong. Harbor's behavior wasn't aggressive. It was desperate, almost pleading. Each time he blocked Junie, his eyes held a look of such intense concern that it made Leona's stomach knot with anxiety. The situation came to a head on Friday afternoon. Leona had just put away the groceries when she heard Harbor's nails clicking rapidly across the floor. She turned to find him stationed over Junie, who had managed to crawl partway into the kitchen while Leona was distracted. This time was different. Harbor's entire body trembled as he stood over the baby, his attention fixed with laser focus on the base of the kitchen cabinets. His ears were forward, his muscles taut, and a continuous low whine escaped his throat. "Harbor!" Leona snapped, her frustration finally boiling over. "That's enough! You're scaring her!" But Junie didn't look scared. She sat contentedly under Harbor's protective stance, playing with a plastic measuring spoon she'd found. It was Harbor who seemed frightened, or rather, intensely concerned about something Leona couldn't see. Exasperated, Leona knelt down beside them, ready to scold Harbor properly. But as she lowered herself to the floor, something stopped her. There, at nose level, she caught a whiff of something that made her freeze. A faint metallic smell, musty and wrong, emanating from the base of the cabinets. Harbor's trembling increased as Leona leaned closer to the cabinet. His whine became more urgent, but he held his position over Junie, as if torn between protecting the baby and making sure Leona understood his warning. The smell was subtle but unmistakable now that she'd noticed it. It reminded her of old pennies and wet cardboard, with an underlying sweetness that made her nose wrinkle. Something about it felt deeply wrong, triggering an instinctive aversion she couldn't explain. Leona sat back on her heels, her earlier frustration replaced by a creeping sense of unease. She looked at Harbor, really looked at him. and saw the intelligence and urgency in his cloudy eyes. This wasn't the behavior of an overprotective pet or an aging dog becoming senile. This was Harbor doing what he'd been trained to do, identifying a threat and protecting those in his care. She reached out and stroked his tense shoulder. "What is it, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" Harbor's only response was to press closer to Junie, his eyes never leaving the base of the cabinet. The trembling in his powerful body continued, communicating an urgency that Leona could no longer ignore. Looking at the cabinet with new eyes, Leona noticed something else, a slight discoloration where the baseboard met the floor, barely visible unless you were at ground level. The paint there seemed different, darker somehow, with tiny spots that might have been water damage. "Come here, sweetie," Leona murmured, lifting Junie into her arms. Harbor immediately relaxed his protective stance, though his attention remained fixed on the cabinet. He pressed against Leona's legs, as if trying to move both her and Junie further from whatever he sensed. Standing in her small kitchen, with Harbor's warm bulk against her legs and Junie secure in her arms, Leona felt the first real stirrings of fear. Harbor's behavior wasn't random or overprotective. It was a warning. And after 2 years of trusting this dog with her life and her daughter's, Leona knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The question was, what exactly was Harbor trying to warn them about? The veterinary clinic waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo. Leona sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair, Harbor's massive head resting on her knee. Every few minutes, she caught herself rubbing the same spot behind his ear, more to comfort herself than him. "It'll be okay, boy," she whispered, though her stomach churned with worry. The thought of Harbor developing aggression made her feel sick. He was her rock, her protector, the one constant she could always count on. But she couldn't ignore how strange he'd been acting. A young woman in blue scrubs appeared in the doorway. "Harbor," she called, checking her clipboard. "Dr. Pike will see you now." Leona stood, grateful they'd managed to get a last-minute appointment. Harbor followed her down the hallway, his nails clicking against the linoleum floor. The exam room was small but clean, with a large metal table in the center and educational posters about heartworm prevention on the walls. Dr. Rowan Pike entered a few minutes later, his presence filling the small room. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and sun-tanned skin that spoke of time spent outdoors. His gentle demeanor immediately put Leona at ease. "So, what brings Harbor in today?" he asked, crouching down to greet the German shepherd. Harbor sniffed his outstretched hand, tail wagging slightly. Leona twisted her hands together. "He's been acting strange lately, blocking my daughter from entering certain areas of our house, standing over her protectively. Sometimes he even growls. Not at her, but at something." She swallowed hard. "I'm worried he might be developing aggression issues." Dr. Pike nodded thoughtfully, running his hands along Harbor's sides. "Has he shown any other concerning behaviors? Any snapping or actual aggressive moves toward people?" "No, never," Leona said quickly. "He's always gentle with Junie. It's more like he's trying to protect her from something. But I don't know what." "Let's take a look at him," Dr. Pike said, lifting Harbor onto the examination table. Harbor stood quietly as the vet checked his eyes, ears, and mouth. He tested Harbor's reflexes and palpated his joints, speaking softly to the dog the whole time. Leona watched anxiously, noting how Dr. Pike's expression grew more focused when he examined Harbor's ears. He performed several quick tests, snapping his fingers near Harbor's head at different angles. "How long have you had Harbor?" he asked, continuing his examination. 2 years. He was retired early from search and rescue work. They said he was still young, but..." She trailed off, realizing she'd never gotten the full story of why Harbor had been retired. Dr. Pike straightened up, his face gentle but serious. "I think I know what's going on here. Harbor is experiencing early-onset hearing loss. It's not uncommon in working dogs, especially those exposed to loud noises during their service." Leona felt her chest tighten. "Hearing loss? But he seems to respond when I call him." "Dogs are incredibly adaptable," Dr. Pike explained. "They learn to compensate by reading body language and picking up on visual cues. But here's the interesting part. When one sense diminishes, others often become more acute. In Harbor's case, his sense of smell has likely become even more sensitive than it already was." He paused, scratching Harbor behind the ears. "German Shepherds have around 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our 6 million. With his hearing loss, Harbor may be relying even more heavily on his nose, and possibly detecting something in your home that's causing him concern." Leona's mind flashed to the metallic smell she'd noticed near the kitchen cabinets. "So when he blocks Junie from the kitchen, he's not being aggressive," Dr. Pike confirmed. "He's doing exactly what he was trained to do, identifying a potential threat and protecting his family. Search and rescue dogs are specifically trained to alert to certain scents that might indicate danger. Harbor's behavior suggests he's picking up on something that's triggering those instincts." Relief flooded through Leona. Harbor wasn't dangerous. He was trying to warn them. But that relief quickly gave way to a new worry. What could he be smelling? "It could be any number of things," Dr. Pike said carefully. "Water damage, mold, gas leaks. These can all produce scents that dogs pick up long before humans notice anything wrong. Given Harbor's background, he's especially attuned to signs of danger." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I'd strongly recommend having your home inspected, particularly the areas Harbor seems concerned about." Leona nodded, her mind already racing. The discolored baseboards, the metallic smell, Harbor's persistent warnings. It all started making a terrible kind of sense. "What about his hearing?" she asked, running her hand along Harbor's back. "Will it get worse?" "It might," Dr. Pike admitted. "But Harbor's adapted remarkably well. He's clearly still very attuned to his environment and dedicated to his job of protecting you and your daughter. We can do regular checkups to monitor his hearing, but honestly, I'm more concerned about what he might be detecting in your home." He pulled out a prescription pad and wrote something down. "Here's the number for a reliable home inspector I know. Tell him I referred you. He'll make time to check things out quickly." He tore off the paper and handed it to Leona, then added, "And please let me know what they find. Harbor's behavior is telling us something important. We should listen." Leona took the paper, touched by his concern. "Thank you, Dr. Pike, for everything." "Call me Rowan," he said with a warm smile. "And thank you for bringing him in. Too often people dismiss their dog's warnings as bad behavior. You did the right thing paying attention to Harbor's signals." As if understanding he was being praised, Harbor pressed against Leona's leg, looking up at her with those intelligent eyes. She scratched his ears, feeling the strong, steady presence she'd come to rely on. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's go home and figure out what you've been trying to tell me." Walking out of the clinic, Leona felt both relieved and unsettled. The weight of worry about Harbor's behavior had lifted, only to be replaced by a new concern about what might be lurking in her home. But at least now she knew. Harbor wasn't the problem. He was trying to solve one. She looked down at her faithful companion, seeing him with new eyes. Even with his hearing fading, he was still protecting them, using every sense he had to keep his family safe. The real question was, what exactly had his powerful nose discovered? As soon as Leona arrived home from the vet clinic, she felt a new sense of purpose. Harbor wasn't being difficult. He was being a hero. She watched as he immediately positioned himself between Junie and the kitchen, his cloudy eyes fixed on the base of the cabinets. "Okay, boy," she said softly. "I hear you now. Let's find out what's wrong." After settling Junie in her playpen with her favorite stuffed giraffe, Leona pulled on rubber gloves and grabbed a flashlight. She opened the cabinet under the sink and began removing cleaning supplies, old sponges, and forgotten bottles of dish soap. The metallic smell grew stronger with each item she removed. "Please just be a leaky pipe," she whispered, though Harbor's intense reaction suggested something worse. When the cabinet was empty, she shined the flashlight into the back corners. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the expected water pipes and dark corners. But as she leaned in closer, her heart stopped. There, spreading across the back wall like a sinister web, was a thick mass of black mold. The surface was fuzzy and damp, with patches that looked almost slimy. "Oh no," she breathed. "No, no, no." The mold wasn't contained to one small area. It had spread up the back wall and was creeping along the baseboards. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see traces of it seeping out from beneath the cabinet's bottom panel. With trembling hands, she pried up the loose corner of the panel. The sight made her gasp. The entire underside was covered in black mold, thick and sprawling. The wood was soft and crumbling, obviously water damaged. How long had this been growing here, right under their noses? Junie coughed from the living room, that same little cough she'd had for weeks now. Leona's blood ran cold. She'd thought it was just a lingering cold. But now... "Harbor knew," she said, looking at her dog who stood watchful in the doorway. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy?" He whined softly, tail lowering. Leona felt sick. Black mold was toxic. She'd read enough to know that. And they'd been living with it, breathing it, while Harbor desperately tried to keep Junie away. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and took several pictures, documenting the extent of the mold. Then she called Bryce Hallowell's office number. His secretary tried to brush her off, but Leona insisted until she was put through. "Mrs. Kessler," Bryce's voice was already impatient. "What seems to be the problem?" "There's black mold in my kitchen," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A lot of it, under the sink and spreading through the walls. My baby has been coughing." Now, he cut her off smoothly. "Let's not be dramatic. A little moisture under the sink is normal. Just run a dehumidifier." "This isn't a little moisture," Leona insisted. "I have photos. This is serious, and it's making my daughter sick. You need to send someone to remove it properly." "I don't need to do anything." His voice took on a harder edge. "If you're unhappy with the unit, you're welcome to give notice and move out. Though I should mention rents have gone up significantly in the area. You'd be looking at least $200 more per month elsewhere." The threat was clear. Leona's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't about being unhappy with the unit. This is about a serious health hazard." "Mrs. Kessler," he interrupted again, "I'm a very busy man. If you continue with these dramatic accusations, I might have to reconsider our rental agreement at the end of your lease. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Wait." But the line was already dead. Leona stared at her phone, anger and fear warring in her chest. From the living room, Junie coughed again, and Harbor let out a low growl. She watched as he positioned himself firmly between the kitchen and the playpen, his stance protective and determined. "I know, Harbor," she said softly. "You're right. This isn't okay." She looked at the black mold again, remembering all the times Harbor had blocked Junie from this area. He'd known it was dangerous. He'd tried to tell them in the only way he could. And now that Leona knew the truth, she couldn't ignore it, no matter what Bryce Hallowell threatened. Harbor's ears perked up at the sound of Junie's babbling. He turned to check on her, then looked back at Leona with those knowing eyes. His message was clear. This wasn't just about standing up to a bully of a landlord anymore. This was about protecting their family. Leona took a deep breath and reached for her phone again. She might not have much money or power, but she had evidence. She had the truth. And most importantly, she had a loyal guardian who'd been trying to sound the alarm all along. It was time to listen to Harbor and fight back. The evening air felt heavy as Leona climbed the worn stairs to her apartment, her mind still racing from the confrontation with Bryce. Harbor padded beside her, his nails clicking softly against the steps. At the landing, she nearly collided with her upstairs neighbor, Maris Elwood. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Elwood." Leona steadied herself, shifting Junie on her hip. Maris touched her arm gently. "Are you all right, dear? You look upset." There was something in the older woman's kind eyes that made Leona's carefully held composure crack. I just found black mold in my kitchen, a lot of it. And when I told Mr. Hallowell—" "He dismissed you," Maris finished, her face growing serious. "Come upstairs with me. There's something you need to see." Leona hesitated for a moment, but Harbor was already following Maris, his tail wagging slightly. She'd always trusted her dog's judgment of character. Maris's apartment was neat but lived in, with faded family photos on the walls and well-worn furniture. She gestured for Leona to sit while she disappeared into a back room. Junie squirmed to get down, and Harbor immediately stationed himself near her as she crawled on the carpet. "My Thomas started coughing first," Maris said as she returned, carrying a worn cardboard box. "Just a little thing, we thought. Allergies, maybe." Her voice wavered. "By the time we realized something was really wrong, the damage to his lungs was severe." Leona's heart clenched. "Mrs. Elwood, I'm so sorry." "Maris, please." She sat down, pulling papers from the box. "Thomas was meticulous about documentation. He filed maintenance requests every time we noticed dampness or odd smells. Made copies of everything." She spread the papers on her coffee table. Leona leaned forward, adjusting Junie in her lap. The documents were maintenance reports spanning over 5 years, all from their building. "Look at the dates," Maris pointed, "and the descriptions. Water damage reported in Unit 3B. That's your apartment now. In February of 2018. Again in June. Again in December." Leona scanned the reports, her stomach turning. Each one described similar issues: water damage, musty odors, crumbling drywall, and each one had Bryce Hallowell's signature at the bottom. "He knew," Leona whispered. "All this time, he knew." Maris nodded grimly. The repairs were always the same. Paint over the spots, replace the cabinet liner, quick fixes that didn't address the real problem. She pulled out more papers. "These are from other units, too, same pattern. Thomas started collecting them when he realized what was happening." "But why didn't anyone report him? File complaints?" "Some tried." Maris's hands trembled slightly as she sorted through more documents. "But Bryce is clever. He'd raise their rent, find reasons to evict them, or just wear them down with delays and excuses until they gave up and moved. Most of his tenants can't afford lawyers or long fights." Leona watched as Junie crawled back to Harbor, who nuzzled her gently. "My daughter's been coughing," she said softly. "I thought it was just a cold." Maris reached across and squeezed her hand. "That's how it started with Thomas. The doctor said the mold exposure over years. It just ate away at his lungs." She blinked back tears. "I should have fought harder then. Should have found a way to make it public." "It's not your fault," Leona said firmly. "Bryce Hallowell did this. He chose to ignore the problem, to cover it up instead of fixing it. And he's still doing it." Maris pulled out one final document, a recent inspection report. "This is from last month. The inspector noted moisture problems in the building's foundation. Bryce had it filed away and did nothing. Leona felt cold anger settling in her chest. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was deliberate endangerment of families, of children, of elderly people like Thomas, who had trusted their landlord to maintain a safe home. "May I take pictures of these?" she asked, pulling out her phone. "All of them?" Maris nodded. "Take the originals. I have copies stored safely elsewhere. Thomas..." She paused, composing herself. Thomas wanted these to matter someday, to help someone stop this from happening to other families. As Leona carefully photographed each document, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were evidence of years of suffering, of lives impacted, and one life lost because of one man's greed and indifference. Harbour moved closer, resting his head on her knee as she worked. His earlier protectiveness of Junie made even more sense now. He'd been trying to prevent their story from becoming like Thomas's. "I don't have much money," Leona said finally, looking up at Maris. "I can't afford a long legal battle." "But you have these now," Maris gestured to the documents. "And you have me. I'll testify about Thomas, about everything we witnessed. There must be other tenants too, ones who'll speak up if they know they're not alone." Leona stacked the papers carefully, her mind racing. "The health department," she said slowly, "and the housing authority, with documentation this extensive." "Yes," Maris smiled slightly. "And local news stations often like stories about negligent landlords endangering families, especially when there's clear evidence and multiple witnesses." Junie crawled back to Leona, pulling herself up on her mother's legs. Her little cough echoed in the quiet room, and both women looked at each other with determination. "Bryce Hallowell thought he could scare me into silence by threatening to raise my rent," Leona said, gathering Junie into her arms. "But this isn't about money anymore. This is about justice. For Thomas, for my daughter, for every family in this building." Maris's eyes filled with tears. Thomas would be so grateful to know his documentation might finally make a difference. She reached out to pet Harbour, who had maintained his protective stance near Junie. "And your wonderful dog. He knew something was wrong all along, didn't he?" "He did," Leona smiled at Harbour. "He's been trying to protect Junie from the kitchen, where the mold is worst. I thought he was just being overprotective, but he sensed the danger." "Animals often know," Maris nodded. "They don't get fooled by smooth talk and legal threats. They just know what's right and wrong, and they protect the ones they love." As if in agreement, Harbour woofed softly, making Junie giggle. The sound brightened the serious mood slightly, reminding them what they were fighting for. "I'll help you organize these," Maris said, beginning to sort the papers by date. "We'll build a clear timeline, showing how long this has been going on, and I have contact information for some of the former tenants who moved out because of similar issues." Leona felt a surge of gratitude for this quiet, strong woman who had endured so much loss, yet was still willing to fight. "Thank you, Maris. I know this must be difficult, bringing up these memories." "It's what needs to be done," Maris said simply. "Thomas always said that evil succeeds when good people stay quiet. Well, we're not going to be quiet anymore." They spent the next hour organizing the documents, with Harbour keeping Junie entertained and away from any walls or baseboards. The stack of evidence grew, telling a story of systematic negligence that spanned nearly a decade. Each report, each complaint, each hastily done repair job added to the picture of a landlord who had chosen profit over people's health and safety. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Leona, Maris, and Dr. Rowan Pike gathered around her small kitchen table. Harbour maintained his vigilant position at the kitchen entrance, his large body forming a living barrier that kept Junie safely in the living room with her toys. "The mold growth is extensive," Rowan said, pulling on latex gloves as he examined the cabinet under the sink. And this isn't recent. These patches show years of development. He carefully took samples, placing them in sterile containers he'd brought from his veterinary clinic. Maris stood nearby, her phone documenting everything with photos and video. The pattern matches exactly what we found in our unit before Thomas got sick, she said quietly. The same spread pattern along the baseboards, the same musty smell. Leona felt her stomach turn as she watched Rowan work. The black patches seemed to mock her, evidence of danger that had been lurking in her home all along. Will the lab be able to tell exactly what type it is? Yes, Rowan nodded, sealing another sample container. I've arranged for rush testing at an environmental laboratory I work with for animal cases. We should have results within 48 hours. Harbour whined softly from his post, and they all turned to see Junie attempting to crawl towards the kitchen again. The big shepherd gently redirected her with his body, nosing her back toward her play area. Good boy, Harbour, Leona said softly, grateful yet again for his protective instincts. She checked her watch. The building inspector should be here in about 30 minutes. We'll be ready, Maris assured her, continuing to photograph every angle of the mold growth. Between the maintenance records, these new photos, and the lab results, there's no way they can ignore this. Rowan stood up, carefully removing his gloves. I've documented signs of water damage in the wall cavity, too. This goes deeper than surface mold. The entire structure behind these cabinets could be compromised. They worked methodically, gathering evidence and measurements. Leona felt stronger with these two allies beside her. Maurice with her quiet determination and documented history. Rowan with his professional expertise and gentle support. The kitchen had become a crime scene of sorts, and they were building their case piece by piece. A sharp knock at the door made them all pause. Harbour's ears perked up, but he didn't leave his post guarding Junie. Leona opened the door to find a middle-aged man in a navy blue polo shirt, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Kessler, I'm Steve Morton from the City Building Inspector's office. Thank you for coming, Leona started to say, but heavy footsteps on the stairs interrupted her. Bryce Hallowell appeared, followed by a man in well-worn work clothes. Ah, perfect timing, Bryce said smoothly, straightening his expensive tie. This is Jim Carter, our building's maintenance contractor. He can explain the minor moisture issue Mrs. Kessler is concerned about. Leona felt her face flush with anger at his dismissive tone, but Rowan stepped forward. Dr. Rowan Pike, he introduced himself to the inspector. I'm here as a professional consultant. We've documented extensive toxic mold growth that appears to have developed over several years. The contractor, Jim, shook his head before even looking at the kitchen. Probably just some surface mildew from poor ventilation. Tenants leave windows closed, run hot showers. This kind of thing happens. Please, come look at the actual evidence, Maris spoke up, her voice steady. I lived upstairs for 15 years. My husband Thomas died from respiratory complications that developed while living here. The inspector moved into the kitchen, but Bryce and Jim crowded in right behind him, their voices overlapping as they offered explanations and excuses. Harbour growled softly from his position, clearly unhappy with the tension in the room. See, just some discoloration, Jim said, barely glancing at the mold. Little bleach, little paint, good as new. That would only hide the problem, Rowan objected. The lab tests will show. Lab tests, Bryce interrupted. That seems like an overreaction to a simple maintenance issue. Mrs. Kessler, if you're unsatisfied with your unit, you're welcome to give notice and find another rental. The threat was clear in his voice, but Leona stood straighter. This isn't about my satisfaction. This is about safety. My baby daughter's safety. The safety of every tenant in this building. The inspector frowned, making notes on his clipboard as Jim continued to minimize the issue. Looks like normal wear and tear to me. These old buildings, you get some moisture problems. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" Maris's voice shook with emotion. "My husband's death certificate says otherwise. We have years of maintenance requests that were ignored." "Now, Mrs. Elwood," Bryce cut in smoothly, "I know you're still grieving, but you can't blame standard building issues for your loss. The inspector can see this is being handled appropriately." The inspector looked uncomfortable, but seemed swayed by Bryce's confident manner and Jim's casual dismissal. "I'll note there's some minor water damage that should be addressed," he said, already moving toward the door. "But I'm not seeing evidence of any major code violations." "But you haven't even tested," Leona started to protest. "Thank you for your time," Bryce said firmly, ushering the inspector out. "Jim will schedule the cosmetic repairs soon." They left quickly, Bryce's expensive aftershave lingering in the air, along with the musty smell of mold. Leona stood in shocked silence, angry tears threatening to fall. "Well," Rowan said quietly, "that was a coordinated effort to sweep this under the rug." "They didn't even look properly," Maris said, her hands shaking as she lowered her phone. "They didn't want to see it." Leona took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Then we'll make them see it. The lab results will prove what's really here, and we'll find someone who will listen." Harbor woofed softly in agreement, still maintaining his protective position. Junie babbled happily from her play area, unaware of the tension around her. "I'll rush these samples to the lab today," Rowan promised, gathering his containers. "And I know some people at the local news stations. Once we have the test results—" "We'll need more than that," Maris said thoughtfully. "We should talk to other tenants, current and former, document any health issues, gather more maintenance records." Leona nodded, her determination growing stronger. "Bryce thinks he won because that inspector walked away. But this was just the beginning. We're going to expose everything, not just the mold, but the pattern of neglect, the cover-ups, all of it." "You're not alone in this," Rowan assured her, his hand warm on her shoulder. "We'll figure out the next steps together." Looking at her allies, steady Rowan, resolute Maris, and faithful Harbor still guarding her daughter, Leona felt her spirits lift despite the morning's setback. They had truth on their side. And they weren't going to stop until that truth came to light. The evening shadows lengthened across Leona's small duplex as she prepared Junie's dinner. Harbor hadn't moved from his post at the kitchen entrance all afternoon, his dark eyes fixed on the cabinets with unwavering focus. His massive body trembled slightly, and occasional whines escaped his throat. "I know, boy," Leona murmured, trying to keep her voice steady for Junie's sake. "I don't like it either." She had just finished feeding Junie when a sharp knock at the front door made her jump. Harbor's head snapped toward the sound, but he didn't abandon his position near the kitchen. Leona lifted Junie from her high chair and went to answer it, her heart pounding. No one was there. Instead, a white paper was taped to her door, the official letterhead of Hallowell Properties stark against the evening gloom. Leona's hands shook as she pulled it free, scanning the typed words that made her stomach drop. Notice of lease violation. Dangerous animal on premises. The letter went on to detail how Harbor had displayed aggressive behavior and posed a threat to other tenants and property staff. It demanded that she either remove the dog within 48 hours or face immediate eviction proceedings. "No," Leona whispered, clutching Junie closer. "No, no, no." She fumbled for her phone, dialing Rowan's number with trembling fingers. When his warm voice answered, she could barely get the words out. "They're trying to take Harbor away," she managed. "Bryce is saying he's dangerous." "What?" Rowan's tone sharpened. "That's ridiculous. Harbor's a trained service animal with a perfect record. I've got all his documentation right here. Don't worry, we'll fight this. There's more, Leona continued. Have you heard anything about the lab samples? A long pause followed. That's actually why I was going to call you, Rowan said slowly. The lab claims they never received them. The whole package is missing. The floor seemed to tilt under Leona's feet. She sank onto the couch, holding Junie in her lap while the baby played with her hair, oblivious to her mother's distress. Someone intercepted them, she said. Bryce must have connections at the testing facility. I'm so sorry, Leona. I should have been more careful, made copies. It's not your fault, she cut in. We're dealing with someone who's been covering his tracks for years. He's got practice at this. Harbor's whining grew louder from the kitchen, more urgent. Leona looked over to see him pacing back and forth across the threshold, his nails clicking against the linoleum. His agitation was worse than she'd ever seen it. Something's wrong, she told Rowan. Harbor's getting more upset by the hour. It's like whatever he's sensing is getting worse. The mold could be spreading faster with all the recent rain, Rowan suggested. Look, don't do anything about that notice tonight. I'll make some calls, see what legal options we have, and I'll get new testing supplies tomorrow. We'll document everything this time, make multiple copies. After hanging up, Leona tried to focus on Junie's bedtime routine, but her mind kept spinning. The eviction threat loomed over her like a dark cloud. She couldn't lose Harbor. He was family, her protector, Junie's guardian. But she couldn't risk homelessness with a baby either. She called Maris next, who answered immediately, despite the late hour. I just got one too, Maris said before Leona could even explain. A notice claiming I'm interfering with property management and harassing other tenants. He's trying to silence us both. The lab samples disappeared too, Leona told her. He's destroying evidence. Not all of it, Maris said firmly. I still have copies of those maintenance records. And I've been talking to other tenants. 3 families moved out last year because their children developed breathing problems. They're willing to come forward. Harbor's pacing grew more frantic. He let out a low bark, something he rarely did indoors, and scratched at the baseboard near the sink. Harbor's getting worse, Leona said. I've never seen him like this. It's scaring me. Can you stay with someone tonight? Maris asked. Maybe we should get you and Junie out of there until… I can't leave, Leona interrupted. If I do, Bryce wins. He'll cover everything up before we can prove what's happening. And Harbor… She watched as the big dog pressed his nose against the wall, trembling. Harbor knows something's wrong. Really wrong. We can't ignore that. Then I'm coming down, Maris declared. You shouldn't be alone tonight. I'll bring my files. We can work on building our case. Leona wanted to protest, to insist she could handle things alone like she always had. But Harbor's increasing distress and the weight of Bryce's threats made her swallow her pride. Thank you, she whispered. After hanging up, she sat on the kitchen floor near Harbor, watching him pace. His cloudy eyes met hers, full of intelligence and worry. She reached out to stroke his graying muzzle. I won't let them take you, she promised. You've protected us. Now it's my turn to protect you. Harbor pressed against her briefly, then resumed his vigil. The metallic smell seemed stronger tonight, and Leona could swear she heard faint creaking from inside the walls. Or maybe it was just her imagination, fueled by fear and uncertainty. Junie babbled from her playpen, reaching toward Harbor. For the first time since this started, he didn't go to her. He stayed at his post, watching the kitchen with fierce intensity. The sound of footsteps overhead announced Maris's approach. Leona rose to let her in, grateful not to face the night alone. As she reached for the door, Harbor's whine rose to a desperate pitch that made her blood run cold. Whatever danger he sensed was growing. And now, with Bryce actively working to silence them, time was running out to expose the truth. The morning sun cast long shadows through Dr. Pike's clinic windows as Leona paced the exam room. Harbor lay on the metal table, his massive frame taking up its entire length, while Rowan drew blood samples. The German Shepherd remained unusually still, as if knowing the importance of the procedure. "I know it seems excessive," Rowan said, carefully labeling the third vial, "but I want to run a complete toxicology panel. His behavior changes are too dramatic to ignore." Leona nodded, watching Harbor's eyes track her movements. Even here, away from the duplex, he seemed tense and vigilant. He barely slept last night, just kept pacing and whining at that kitchen wall. "Has Junie's cough gotten any worse?" Rowan asked, his gentle hands steadying Harbor as he drew the final sample. "It comes and goes. The pediatrician prescribed an inhaler, but—" Leona's voice cracked. "I feel so helpless. That mold is still there, growing, and Bryce is blocking every attempt we make to prove it." Rowan capped the last vial and placed a cotton ball over the draw site. "I'm running these tests myself, in-house. No outside lab for Bryce to interfere with." He scratched behind Harbor's ears. "Good boy. Such a good boy. How long until we know something?" "Give me 2 hours. Why don't you take Harbor for a walk around the grounds? The fresh air will do you both." "Good." Leona helped Harbor down from the table, noticing how he leaned against her more heavily than usual. Outside, the clinic's fenced yard offered a peaceful retreat. Harbor sniffed half-heartedly at the grass, but stayed close to her side, his usual enthusiasm dampened. "You're trying to tell us something, aren't you?" she murmured, running her fingers through his thick fur. "We're just too slow to understand." The 2 hours crawled by. Leona called to check on Junie, who was happily playing at Maris's apartment. She tried to focus on answering work emails on her phone, but her mind kept drifting to the night before. Harbor's desperate pacing, the creaking walls, the metallic smell that seemed to grow stronger by the day. When Rowan finally called them back inside, his expression made her stomach drop. "You should sit down," he said quietly, gesturing to a chair while pulling up test results on his computer screen. Harbor pressed against her legs as she sank into the seat. "The results are—" Rowan paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're unlike anything I've seen before. Harbor's blood shows extremely high levels of mycotoxins, poisonous compounds produced by certain molds. The concentration is alarming." Leona's hands twisted in her lap. "What does that mean? Is he going to be okay?" "Here's what's fascinating, and deeply concerning." Rowan turned the screen so she could see the complex charts. "These particular toxins are fat-soluble. They build up in fatty tissue over time. Harbor's size and body composition mean he's been essentially acting as a filter, absorbing these compounds at a much higher rate than a smaller body would." The implications hit Leona like a physical blow. "You mean he's been taking it in? Instead of Junie?" Rowan nodded gravely. His protective instincts combined with his physiology. He's been shielding her in more ways than just blocking her path. The levels in his system suggest he's been absorbing these toxins for months, probably since they first started developing in your walls. Tears spilled down Leona's cheeks as she looked at Harbor. He gazed back steadily, that same unwavering loyalty in his eyes that had been there since the day she'd adopted him. Even now he was trying to comfort her, pushing his head under her hand. "The good news," Rowan continued gently, "is that we can start him on treatments to help flush these toxins from his system." "But Leona—" He leaned forward, his voice serious. "You need to get him, all of you, out of that environment. These levels will keep climbing otherwise. He's putting himself at risk to protect Junie." Leona buried her face in Harbor's fur, her shoulders shaking. All this time, while she'd been frustrated with his behavior, questioning his actions, He'd been slowly poisoning himself to keep her baby safe. The depth of his sacrifice overwhelmed her. "I knew you were special," she whispered to Harbor. "From the first day at the rescue center when you picked us. You chose to be our protector." "He's an extraordinary animal," Rowan agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. "But he needs protecting now, too. These toxin levels, they're dangerous. They could start affecting his organs if they climb much higher." Leona straightened, wiping her eyes. The fear and helplessness that had plagued her for weeks crystallized into something harder, sharper. "I need copies of these results, multiple copies. And I need you to write up an official veterinary report detailing exactly what these toxins mean, what they indicate about our living conditions." Rowan was already nodding. "I'll document everything. This is clear medical evidence of environmental poisoning. But Leona..." He reached across his desk to squeeze her hand. "Be careful. People who've been covering up problems this long, they don't react well to being exposed." "I don't care anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "Harbor's been fighting for us this whole time, putting his own life at risk. Now it's my turn to fight for him." Harbor pressed closer, his warm weight against her legs both comforting and strengthening. The loyal guardian who had absorbed poison to protect her child. The friend who had tried so hard to warn them of invisible danger. "We're going to fix this," she promised him, running her hands over his graying muzzle. "You've done enough. Let me be the protector now." The afternoon sun filtered through Leona's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the stack of papers spread across her small dining table. Lab results showing Harbor's toxin levels, Dr. Rowan's detailed veterinary report, photos of the black mold creeping behind the cabinets, old maintenance records from Maris. Everything organized in neat folders, ready for her meeting with Sarah Chen, the tenant's rights lawyer who'd agreed to look at her case. Harbor lay at her feet, his breathing slightly labored. The medication from Dr. Rowan had helped, but Leona could see how the toxins were wearing him down. His once bright eyes looked tired, though they still tracked Junie's every movement as she played with blocks on her blanket in the living room. Leona's phone buzzed. A text from Maris upstairs. "Bryce just pulled up with some guy in a truck. Looks like a handyman." Her heart rate quickened. The building inspection was scheduled for tomorrow morning. After weeks of ignoring her complaints, why would Bryce suddenly send someone now? Heavy footsteps climbed the front steps. A sharp knock. Leona scooped up Junie and opened the door to find a stocky man in paint-stained coveralls. He barely made eye contact. "Name's Pete. Mr. Hallowell sent me to do some cabinet work," he mumbled, already pushing past her with a toolbox and saw. "Wait, I wasn't notified of any repairs," Leona protested, but Pete was already kneeling by the kitchen cabinets, pulling out tools. Harbor rose slowly, hackles lifting as he watched the man work. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Better keep that dog away," Pete warned, yanking at the rotted cabinet base without any apparent concern for safety protocols. No mask, no containment barriers, nothing to prevent the mold spores from spreading through the air. "You can't just tear into contaminated materials like that," Leona said, her voice rising. "There are proper procedures." "Look, lady, I'm just doing what I'm told." Pete pulled out an electric saw, extension cord trailing across the wet floor near exposed wiring where the cabinet's water damage had eaten through to the wall. Harbor's growl turned to sharp, urgent barking. The sound made Junie squirm in Leona's arms, reaching toward the noise and activity. "No, baby," Leona soothed, trying to turn away, but Junie arched her back, pushing to get down. The moment her feet touched floor, she toddled straight for the kitchen, drawn by curiosity. "Junie, stop!" Leona lunged after her daughter. Harbor's barking reached a fever pitch, his deep voice echoing off the walls as Pete's saw whirred to life, sending up a cloud of contaminated dust. The handyman worked with reckless speed, clearly rushing to hide evidence before tomorrow's inspection. Each crack of splintering wood made Harbor bark more frantically, his aging body trembling with the effort to sound his warning. Leona caught Junie just before she reached the kitchen threshold, pulling her back as Pete's saw hit metal with a terrible screech. Sparks flew near the puddle of water spreading from the damaged pipes. "You have to stop!" Leona shouted over Harbor's barking. "This isn't safe!" "Almost done," Pete grunted, not even looking up as he yanked at exposed wiring. Leona clutched Junie close, her heart pounding. She could smell the mold spores released into the air, could see the dangerous mix of water and electricity. Harbor planted himself between them and the kitchen, his barking desperate now, trying to warn them all of the danger Pete was carelessly creating. She fumbled for her phone with her free hand, quickly typing a message to both Maris and Dr. Rowan. "Bryce sent someone to destroy evidence. No safety protocols. Need witnesses now." The saw's whine grew louder. Harbor's barking became more urgent. And through it all, Pete kept working, determined to cover up years of neglect before it could be properly documented, heedless of the immediate danger he was creating. Leona held Junie tighter, watching in horror as Pete's reckless demolition threatened to turn their already unsafe home into something far worse. Harbor's warning barks echoed through the small space, a desperate alarm that something was about to go terribly wrong. The next few moments unfolded in horrifying slow motion. A bright spark leaped from Pete's saw, where it had caught the exposed wiring, dancing like a deadly firefly through the mist of water droplets in the air. Harbor's bark reached a pitch Leona had never heard before. Raw, desperate, terrified. Then came the explosion. It started as a whoosh under the sink, where decades of rot had created a pocket of toxic gases. The spark ignited it all at once, and a ball of orange flame burst outward like a blooming flower of death. The force knocked Leona backward. She lost her grip on Junie as she slammed into the living room wall, her lungs immediately filling with thick, black smoke. "Junie!" she screamed, but the word came out as a choking gasp. The smoke was everywhere now, turning the familiar shapes of her home into dark, twisted shadows. Through streaming eyes, she saw Pete stumbling toward the door, coughing violently. Harbor moved with the swift precision of his search and rescue training. While Leona was still struggling to get her bearings, he had already located Junie. The toddler lay crying on the floor where she had fallen, confused and scared. Harbor's massive jaws closed gentle but firm on the back of her overalls, and he began dragging her toward the front door. "Harbor!" Leona tried to call out, but inhaled more smoke instead. Her chest burned. The fire was spreading with terrifying speed, feeding on the old, dry wood of the cabinets and walls. The heat pressed against her skin like a physical weight. She tried to crawl toward where she had last seen Harbor and Junie, but the smoke was so thick now she could barely see her own hands in front of her. Her head spun from lack of oxygen. The roar of the flames filled her ears, along with the sharp crack of wood giving way as the fire ate through the structure of the house. Then through the chaos came Harbor's bark, different now, commanding. He was back. She felt his wet nose press against her face, then his teeth carefully gripping her sleeve. He pulled hard, forcing her to move. When she tried to stand, he barked again and pushed down on her shoulder with his paw. The message was clear. Stay low. Leona crawled forward, letting Harbor guide her. The smoke was less dense near the floor, but the heat was incredible. She could hear the fire roaring behind them, feel it reaching for them with hungry fingers. Harbor kept nudging her, steering her around obstacles she couldn't see, preventing her from going the wrong way in her confusion. Something crashed behind them. It sounded like part of the ceiling giving way. Sparks and burning debris rained down. Harbor pressed his body against her, sheltering her from the worst of it. His fur was hot to the touch, but he didn't flinch or hesitate. He just kept pushing her forward, one agonizing foot at a time. Finally, mercifully, fresh air hit her face. They had reached the door. Leona stumbled out onto the front steps, gasping and coughing. Through tear-filled eyes, she saw Junie safe in Maris's arms. Her neighbor must have heard the explosion and come running. Other neighbors were gathering too, and someone was shouting about calling 911. "Harbor!" Leona wheezed, turning to thank her hero. But the big dog had collapsed on the grass, his sides heaving with labored breaths. His muzzle was covered in soot, and his usually bright eyes were dull with exhaustion and pain. "No, no, no," Leona crawled to him, gathering his huge head into her lap. "Stay with me, boy. Please stay with me." His tail thumped weakly against the ground, still trying to comfort her, even now. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The fire continued to consume the duplex, black smoke billowing into the bright afternoon sky. But Leona barely noticed any of it. She just held Harbor, stroking his ash-covered fur, feeling his struggling breaths against her legs. He had saved them both, just as he had been trying to protect them all along. First from the hidden danger of the mold, and now from the fire it had helped create. "Help is coming," she whispered to him, her voice raw from smoke. "You did it, Harbor. You got us out. You saved Junie. You saved me." She pressed her face into his fur, not caring about the soot that covered them both. "You're such a good boy. The best boy." Harbor's breathing was getting more labored now, each inhale a struggling wheeze. The smoke exposure was hitting him hard, especially with his system already weakened by months of exposure to the toxic mold. But still, he kept his eyes fixed on Junie, watching to make sure she was safe, even as his own strength faded. The fire trucks arrived with a screech of brakes and blast of horns. Emergency workers swarmed the scene, bringing oxygen masks and medical equipment. But Leona couldn't focus on any of it. She just held Harbor, her protector, her hero, praying his incredible strength would see him through one more battle. The fire marshal's heavy boots crunched over broken glass and charred debris as he examined the kitchen ruins. His flashlight beam cut through the lingering haze, stopping at the twisted remains of the gas line behind where the cabinets had been. He crouched down, face grim. "This is some of the worst code violation work I've seen in 20 years, he announced, gesturing for his team to document everything. These modifications were completely illegal. Old pipe fittings, improper connections. It's amazing this didn't blow sooner." Leona watched from just outside the yellow caution tape, her arms wrapped around herself. She couldn't stop shaking, though whether from cold or shock or fury, she wasn't sure. The acrid smell of smoke still filled her nose, mixing with the metallic scent she now knew had been the corroded gas line all along. "The handyman Bryce sent," she said, her voice still rough. "He was working on the pipes right before—" "Without permits or proper certification," the fire marshal confirmed. "We'll need your statement about that." Rowan arrived then, having rushed straight from his clinic. His normally calm face was tight with anger as he handed the fire marshal a thick folder. "These are Harbor's complete medical records, including blood work showing dangerous levels of toxic mold exposure. The dog was literally poisoning himself trying to protect that baby." The marshal flipped through the papers, eyebrows rising. "This shows a clear pattern of environmental contamination. How long had the mold issue been reported?" "Multiple times over years," Maris spoke up from where she stood, comforting a still distraught Junie. She pulled out her own weathered folder, the maintenance records she'd saved. My Harold got sick from it too before he passed. Every time we complained, Bryce would send someone to paint over it or do quick patches. Never fixed the actual problem. Investigators gathered around, photographing the documents, taking statements. The evidence mounted steadily. Falsified repair records, ignored maintenance requests, unauthorized work, building code violations. The truth Bryce had worked so hard to hide was finally, fully exposed. Ms. Kessler? A young police officer approached Leona. Mr. Hallowell is outside. He's demanding to speak with you. Leona's hands clenched. Tell him to talk to my lawyer. Her voice was steel. I have to get to the emergency vet. The drive to the animal hospital was a blur. Rowan insisted on taking her, knowing she was in no state to drive. They'd rushed Harbor there right after the fire, and Leona had only left his side long enough to give her initial statement to investigators. He's strong, Rowan said quietly as they walked through the clinic doors, and he's got something to fight for. The emergency vet met them in the treatment area, where Harbor lay unconscious, hooked up to monitors and an oxygen mask. His massive chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Soot still clung to his grayed muzzle despite their attempts to clean him. The smoke inhalation is severe, the vet explained gently, and his system was already compromised from the mold exposure. The next 24 hours will be critical. Leona sank into the chair beside Harbor's bed, taking his big paw in her hands. His skin felt too warm through his fur. You have to pull through this, she whispered. Please, we need you. The monitors beeped steadily as hours crawled by. Rowan brought her coffee and made her eat something, though she tasted nothing. Maris called with updates. More investigators had arrived, more evidence discovered. Bryce was being questioned by police. But it all felt distant and unimportant compared to Harbor's labored breathing. He saved our lives, she told Rowan during one of his check-ins. He tried to warn us about the mold for months. Then he got Junie out of the fire first, came back for me. Her voice broke. He's always protected us. I can't lose him. I know. Rowan squeezed her shoulder. Try to rest. I'll stay and monitor him. But Leona couldn't rest. She kept her vigil beside Harbor's bed, talking to him softly, willing him to keep fighting. Outside the window, day faded to evening, then to night. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but Harbor remained still, lost in healing sleep while his body battled the damage the smoke had done. You're the hero of this whole story, she told him, stroking his ear. We just didn't know it until now. But you knew all along, didn't you? You always knew. As dawn broke outside the veterinary clinic, Leona's phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. She read it through bleary eyes, then had to read it again to make sure she understood. They've charged him, she told Harbor's sleeping form. Criminal negligence, fraud, multiple building code violations. Her voice trembled. He's going to face real consequences this time. The news spread quickly. By mid-morning, 3 more tenants had come forward with similar stories of neglect and cover-ups. Local news vans gathered outside the burned duplex, where reporters interviewed Maris about the maintenance records she'd saved. But the moment that truly turned public opinion came when someone shared their cell phone video of the fire. The shaky footage showed Harbor, fur singed and smoking, first dragging Junie to safety, then charging back into the flames for Leona. There was no mistaking his heroism. So much for that dangerous animal claim, Rowan said, watching the video play on the clinic's break room TV. His hand found Leona's shoulder, steadying her as she wiped away tears. Everyone can see what we already knew. He's a hero. That afternoon, Harbor's breathing grew stronger. His eyes flickered open for the first time since the fire, focusing hazily on Leona's face. His tail thumped weakly against the bed. There's my brave boy, she whispered, kissing his grayed muzzle. "You just keep getting better. We've got important work ahead." Her lawyer was already preparing her testimony for the upcoming court cases, where once the thought of facing Bryce would have terrified her. Now Leona felt only determination. She had evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, the truth on her side. "The prosecutors want to talk to you about the illegal repairs," Rowan told her, bringing her fresh coffee. "And there are already 6 other tenants joining the civil suit." Leona nodded, watching Harbor drift back to healing sleep. "He can't hurt anyone else now. No more hiding problems, no more threats, no more families getting sick." She straightened her shoulders. "We're going to make sure of that." The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Leona took the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt, but her voice rang clear and steady when she began to speak. 3 weeks had passed since the fire, and she'd rehearsed this testimony countless times in her mind. "The mold was just the beginning," she explained, meeting the jury's eyes. "When I tried to report it, Mr. Hallowell told me I was being dramatic. He said if I kept complaining, he'd raise my rent. Rent I could barely afford as a single mother." From his seat at the defense table, Bryce Hallowell shifted uncomfortably, his usual, confident smirk nowhere to be seen. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. "My dog Harbor. He knew something was wrong before any of us," Leona continued. "He kept my baby away from that kitchen, and when we finally found proof of the black mold, Mr. Hallowell didn't just ignore it. He actively tried to cover it up." She described the missing lab reports, the threatening eviction notice, the illegal repairs that led to the fire. Her voice grew stronger with each revelation. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was for every family who'd lived in fear under Bryce's negligence. "The fire inspector found gas lines that hadn't been properly maintained in 15 years, she said. "Harbor saved my daughter's life that day. He saved my life, and Mr. Hallowell tried to label him as dangerous to silence us." The jury's verdict came swiftly. Bryce was found guilty on all counts. The civil settlement that followed was substantial enough to give Leona a fresh start, enough for a down payment on a small house with a real yard. That evening, Leona visited Harbor at the veterinary clinic where he was still recovering. His tail thumped against the bed as she approached, his eyes bright with recognition. "We did it, boy," she whispered, sinking down beside him. "We really did it." She stroked his graying muzzle, remembering how he'd dragged her from the flames. "When you're better, we're going to have a real home. No more worrying about landlords or mold or keeping quiet when things are wrong. You'll have a yard to patrol, and Junie will have safe places to play." Harbor's tail wagged harder at the mention of Junie's name. The doctor said he was getting stronger every day, though the smoke damage to his lungs would take time to heal. "You protected us when we needed it most," Leona told him softly. "Now it's my turn to take care of you. I promise you'll have the life you deserve. Both of you will." She meant it with all her heart. After everything they'd been through, she would make sure her little family never felt unsafe or powerless again. Spring sunshine streamed through spotless windows, casting warm squares of light across the honey-colored hardwood floors of Leona's new kitchen. The brightness felt symbolic, like nature itself celebrating their fresh start. She stood at the sink, washing breakfast dishes and marveling at how different everything felt. No musty smells, no lurking dangers, just the clean scent of lemon and fresh paint. Harbor's nails clicked against the floor as he made his methodical rounds, checking each doorway and window with the same dedication he'd always shown. Though his pace was a bit slower these days, his recovery had been remarkable. The veterinarian said his protective instincts had probably helped him fight through the worst of the smoke damage. That same drive to keep his family safe had given him the strength to heal. The German Shepherd paused at the front door, ears perking at an approaching sound. Moments later, the doorbell chimed. Harbor's tail began to wag. He knew that visitor. "Come in," Leona called out, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her heart did a little flutter when Dr. Rowan Pike stepped inside, holding a bright bouquet of spring flowers. "Thought your new home could use some color," he said with that gentle smile that had become so familiar during Harbor's recovery. The flowers were cheerful daisies and purple iris, simple but beautiful, just like the growing connection between them. "They're perfect," Leona said softly, taking the bouquet. Their fingers brushed as she accepted them, and neither pulled away too quickly. "I'll put them in water. Junie's in the living room if you want to say hi." As if on cue, excited baby babbling drifted in from the next room. Rowan's smile widened as he moved toward the sound, Harbor falling into step beside him. The bond between the vet and the dog had grown strong during those weeks of treatment. Leona found a vase under the sink, a normal, safe under-sink space now, and arranged the flowers while listening to the happy sounds from the living room. Junie's delighted giggles mixed with Rowan's warm chuckles and Harbor's contented huffs. When she joined them, she found Junie toddling between Rowan and Harbor, playing an improvised game of back and forth. Each time she reached Harbor, he would gently bump her with his nose, sending her giggling back toward Rowan. The sight filled Leona's heart almost to bursting. "The yard's coming along nicely," Rowan commented, nodding toward the window. The small backyard was indeed transforming. Fresh grass growing in, flower beds taking shape, a tiny sandbox for Junie. "Harbor must love having his own territory to patrol." "He does," Leona agreed, watching as her dog guided Junie away from bumping the coffee table. "Though he still checks the kitchen more than anywhere else. Old habits, I guess." "Good habits," Rowan corrected softly. "He'll always be a protector. It's who he is." He paused, then added, "Like someone else I know." Leona felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. The woman she'd been 6 months ago, scared, uncertain, doubting her own instincts, seemed like a stranger now, standing up to Bryce, fighting for justice, creating this safe haven for her daughter. It had changed her fundamentally. "I never thought I'd feel this peaceful," she admitted, sinking onto the couch. "Just breathing easy, knowing we're really home." Rowan sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You earned this," he said simply. "All of it." Harbor padded over and settled at their feet, still keeping one eye on Junie as she explored her toy basket. The afternoon sun painted everything in soft gold, and Leona felt something settle in her soul, a quiet certainty that this was exactly where they were meant to be. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs. Junie's favorite." "I'd love to," Rowan answered, and the warmth in his eyes suggested he understood this was about more than just one meal. It was an invitation to be part of their new beginning, to see where this gentle attraction might lead. Junie tottered over with a book, climbing onto the couch between them. Harbor repositioned himself to keep all 3 humans in his sight, radiating contentment. As Rowan began reading the story aloud, his voice steady and soothing, Leona closed her eyes for just a moment. This was what safety felt like. This was what coming home meant. Not just the solid walls and sound foundation, but the people within them, her daughter growing strong and happy, her loyal dog finally at peace, and maybe, just maybe, room in her heart for something new to bloom. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.